Today we're talking with Dr. Susan Maiava, an accomplished academic and practitioner in the field of international development. Dr. Maiava moved to Samoa in 1984, where she later taught at the National University of Samoa and University of the South Pacific. In 2020, she co-founded Fair and Good. Like People Heart Planet, Fair and Good is an online shopping platform, an ethical brands directory that makes it easy for conscious consumers to source ethical products. We hope today's conversation inspires you to learn more about ethical trade and to check out shopping sites like People Heart Planet and Fair and Good, which make it easy for you to buy fair trade and sustainable products. Our first question for Dr. Maiava is, what is international development?
Development was conceived really of as charity, of helping poor people by providing the Western model, the Western way of teaching, the Western way of doing things, providing things. Western capitalism would solve everything. The West is best. And at that time, it was considered charity, and there was no concept of just exploitation, empowerment at all. Now we actually think quite differently, and we see a development in terms of justice and equity.
How did you become interested in international development?
In my life, it goes right back to my early teenage years. In fact, even possibly before I was a teenager. Yeah. And probably the earliest thing I remember was, this was back in the day when there really were famines in Africa. And I remember a famine in Biafra. And Biafra is now a part of Nigeria. And it really influenced me as a very young person, or how I could live so comfortably. I didn't understand it at all, but what I did know was that would become my life's work. It was something I would have to figure out and make part of my life.
You're from New Zealand. What prompted you to go to Samoa, and what did you learn from that experience?
So I went to Samoa because of the earlier conversion, you might like, that I wanted to work in this area. So I guess because of my upbringing, I was expected to this and expected to have a nice job and everything. And when I got to 24, I thought, no, I just don't want to these expectations. I want to put into practice what I'd already knew inside me. That's when I became a little bit of a rebel in my family's eyes and volunteered to go to Samoa and work in Samoa. So really I was putting into practice what I,
You said you don't use the word poor anymore. What do you use instead?
I don't know that if I just say people. I just don't describe them as being poor. It was a student in Samoa that she was very bold and brave, actually, in a class, described Samoans as being poor. And I was, remember I was about 24 at the time. And she actually came up to me and said, please don't call us poor. We don't think of ourselves as poor. We are not poor, and we don't think of ourselves as being poor. And it just like shocked the heck out of me. And from that moment, I never called anybody poor again.
Huh. I'm gonna have to think on that one.
It's because they themselves never saw themselves as being poor. And because that's only a monetary description.
Yes, exactly. I think it's always, describing someone based on how much money they have as poor. Yeah. And, if you don't really need much and, you're happy just having what you have, then you obviously don't think of yourself as poor.
And also they're very, very rich culturally, very rich in terms of family and culture and village life and so on. So it's just our Western perception, really. Yeah.
Although I wonder if, like in certain situations where, like you said, there's exploitation going on, maybe even using the words that people are being economically exploited as opposed to saying poor. But then it does get at that root issue. Dr. Maiava, you've experienced firsthand the success of microlending and microfinance programs. For people who are looking for ways to positively participate in economic development, would you recommend supporting these programs?
I would really encourage that, actually. That funding is really well used, and it gets, so long as you've got a reputable organisation, of course, and they should be transparent and you should be able to see it. But the thing that, everybody, when microfinancing started, everybody said, oh no, the people won't repay their money. But what they have found is that the people do repay their money, and the self-help groups are sort of self-monitoring. So I've been in a couple of groups where the group meets, and I've observed you have someone with a book. Everybody comes along with just a few rupees or something every week, and it's all recorded in a book. There's a secretary and so on. And then when a certain amount is reached, then that's loaned, and people have to justify to the group, why they should get the loan and what they're going to use it for, and the group has to agree. And then, they do have to pay the money back slowly, and as possible. And then it's lent out to somebody else, and it just cycles, and groups maybe split off into other groups as it grows and grows. But because you're working in the group situation, the group self-monitors. People can't get away with taking the money or not using it properly or whatever. They are extraordinarily successful, yeah, they really are. And I would encourage anyone to help finance, contribute some finance to those, because then they can multiply.
What an example of democracy and capitalism at its best.
Absolutely. Yes.
The rest of the world take note. Right?
Yes.
And what's interesting actually in microfinance is the majority of them are women.
Yes.
At least, in Bangladesh and India, where it first, started to gain momentum. There's just, it's amazing to see that women are building these sort of small businesses and, being successful and actually repaying this money. So it actually debunked a lot of these, myths around, them not paying the money back and things.
So now moving from development to the consumer side of things, which of course we all are, tell us, what is ethical trade?
I don't have a very strict definition of it, but it's for me, it's an equal exchange. It's about equality and equity. So the exchange between the buyer and the seller is equal, and both benefit equally from the exchange. Really, that's what it is. There's no exploitation either way. Now, in practical terms, that means, like in the factory, you've got fair wage, preferably living wage or above. The hours are reasonable. The working conditions are safe. There's overtime is not forced. There's no children involved. In other words, the parents are paid enough so that they don't have to send their children to work in factories. They're paid enough that they can pay for the school fees for their children to go to school. So they're what's technically it's called the costs of reproduction. That's a very academic term. Are paid but by the wages and so on that they earn, but their rights are upheld, and they're in safe working conditions. In terms of artisans and in farmers, where you don't have fixed hours or whatever, it's about fair prices being paid for the product or for the crops. So for farmers, it's often about, well, it is really about stability. It's about stable prices. It's about being paid on time or in advance or at agreed intervals, so they don't have to wait for being to be paid. So there's a lot in it. Stable guaranteed prices for farmers, so they know what they're going to get, and for supply chains to be transparent, and that includes subcontractors as well. A lot can be hidden in subcontracting, and I think that's a place where exploitation can hide very much. So transparency is really the key there.
So why is ethical trade so important in regard to international development?
I I actually think that ethical trade in development is way massively overlooked, and there's possibly two reasons for that. I think because number one would be because we just see development as the spread of capitalism, and we go, oh well, if capitalism is spreading, okay, that must be a good thing. And the other thing is we see development as charity rather than justice. So we don't see it. We don't think in terms of our relationships with the people who are making the products for us. We don't necessarily, as I was kind of explaining before, we don't see them as people who are knowing, active and capable. So I see it as something like a glass ceiling. We put development funds into education, into sanitation, health, water supply, combating disease, maternal health. All of these things are really, really good things. And we can even support microfinance projects, as I was talking about before. But those people that I saw in those groups, if they have a little business, that's great, isn't that great? But if they can't sell their product for a fair and reasonable price, that creates a ceiling. It's all very well, I might be able to grow my crop or whatever, but if I can't sell it, I'm no better off. If I've got an education and a PhD degree and I'm in good health, but I can't earn an income, I'm no better off. Do you know what I mean? So it's a ceiling that needs to be sort of broken through somehow. And that breakthrough needs to happen to achieve prosperity.
So you know that we have something really important in common. My three and I created People Heart Planet, a shopping platform that makes it easy for people to discover and shop fair trade products. And you did the same by creating Fair and Good, an ethical shopping platform that targets consumers in your home country of New Zealand. Why did you launch Fair and Good?
So we were concerned about all these issues that we've been discussing, but we didn't want to start our own business, and we didn't want to repeat what people were already doing, and we didn't want to compete with anybody. And we actually held a couple of conferences, fair trade, we called them Fairfield Conferences, and they worked really well. We had great speakers, they were very successful, people came along, but the people who came along were the converted. We were sort of preaching to the converted, and then COVID came along and we thought, well, we can't have any more conferences. But we wanted to expand our influence. We really wanted to if we've got this long-term goal of making ethical products mainstream, normalizing it. And so we wanted to reach a tipping point so that businesses would supply. In response to consumer demand or purchasing power, we'd use that power to influence businesses to stock products on their shelves. That was the tipping point we wanted to reach. How are we going to have a bigger influence? And we did a bit of research and we realized that there was a gap. And the gap was that people found they wanted to shop ethically, but we found that they didn't know what products were ethical, how did they know, how could they find them? And it was all a bit confusing and it was all a bit too hard. And we thought, that's it. That's where we can simplify the process. That's where we can make it easier for them.
What's the main purpose of Fair and Good?
Yeah, our core desire is to create that consumer demand, to reach that tipping point, to normalize and mainstream ethical shopping.
Yeah, I think making it easier for people is exactly what is needed. Making it easier, because we did a little bit of research, our own research, and we found 53% of people actually want to shop, but 67% said
it was too difficult. They couldn't identify the products, they didn't know where to find them, and they didn't know who to trust, what messaging to trust, so.
Right, and I know the studies, there's a lot being written now, there's studies coming out saying, oh, maybe people are saying yes to that question, but they're not really going to follow through. And why aren't they following through more? How come we're not seeing some of those sales go up? And it actually sort of infuriates me when I read that, because I think we're just now making it a little bit easier for people, and it's still not easy. So can't you give people a minute to sort of let their motivations not only, be present, but also figure out how to act on them? I mean, I think, my God, I have cared about these issues for 20 years. And it took me that long before I thought to myself, oh, I should really start like full-time converting my behavior, my consumer behavior. So for people to start making these swaps and doing all these things, just let's give everybody a minute to just catch up before we say that ethical consumerism is a myth.
Besides access, what are other barriers to making fair trade more mainstream?
I'll also say that in New Zealand, and I don't know if it's in your culture as well, but I think it's something going back to our pioneering spirit, that we love a bargain, and we value a bargain. So that is something that's very hard to get over, when people will say, oh, I bought this, oh, and I got it half price in a sale, and that's oh, did you really? Oh, good on you. It's very hard for people to get over we're looking for the cheapest all the time, and we're that's ingrained. And get over the thing that says, okay, maybe you might not necessarily buy the cheapest, but you should buy the best. You buy the one that is best. It may not necessarily be the cheapest, but perhaps buy a little less, but buy the best.
Yeah, and the system has allowed that to become a problem, right?
Because yes.
Even if you still want to feel like, oh, I found something, where I got a little bit of a sale or that sort of thing, the sale price could still not exploit people if we're used to paying higher prices across the board, which we can afford if we adjust other things. I mean, I think the system has just gotten so out of whack.
Yes.
And so now people don't even realize, we're just so disconnected from the makers and what's happening in the places where things are being made.
Well, that's one of the things we do on Fair and Good, is we tell the stories. We're very keen on telling stories. We want to connect buyers to the makers and tell their story. We tell their story of their families, their children, what they do, their skills, particularly as artisans and craftspeople and so on. Those things people hold up, say, I made your jewelry, I made your clothes, I made your something. And just, these are real people that have made what you consume. There's a connection there. You actually have, through your purchase, you have a connection with these people, and that connection should be a just and right and ethical connection. Because actually, if it's not a just and right and ethical connection, then it's an exploitative connection.
Right. Well, I think people, once they have enough of the facts and the information, once the stories, more than the facts, once the stories are told, then they are ready to ask that question. And I think that campaign is so positive, who made my clothes, who made your clothes, that kind of thing, as opposed to, it's not about shame and guilt, because it's not an individual's fault that the system exploits people like this. But if there are alternatives, so you don't have to participate in it, why not? I mean, what a fantastic thing.
But the other side of that is that the individual can influence the system. If we all en masse, let's say we all en masse buy free range eggs, for example, then what do you know? Next thing, the farmers are just producing free range eggs, because if we refuse to buy cage eggs, so we do have that power. And that is what we really want to harness.
When it comes to ethical consumerism, do you think it's important to differentiate between environmental motivations and other workers' rights and human rights issues?
I do have a little bit of a bee in my bonnet about the sustainability argument drowning out the ethical. And a lot of conscious consumers, they're conscious about using plastic, having an e-bike, reducing their emissions. It's their recycling, reusing, all of that. But it just annoys me that somehow don't seem to quite get it, that the way you treat the people that make those products is at least as important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is odd that it would sort of come under the umbrella of, as opposed to being like, whoa, these are two equally important heavyweight issues.
Absolutely. Yes.
And for me, actually, I did come at it first from the perspective of who made these clothes, how are they being treated? And we met volunteering for a climate change organization, and you were really thinking about environmental issues more than I was. And that was such a great marriage for us, because we kept balancing each other in terms of like, oh, this side of the issue and this side of the issue. And I just thought, oh, this is really what, obviously, if we can get more creative in these movements to sort of bring all these pieces together, let people work on their one piece of the pie, but have a narrative that for sure encompasses everything.
Yeah.
Well, we've come to the last question, and that is, our motto at People Heart Planet is to love people and love the planet. Do you think love is part of why you advocate for fair trade, or what is your deep motivation?
Love is my motivation. No doubt about that. I guess I see, and going way back to when I was young, I see everybody on the planet as being equal. And I see every single person on this planet is made in God's image and is loved by God. So that is the beggar in the street, or the prime minister or president or whatever, that we're all equal in God's eyes. So why shouldn't we be more equal, on the planet? Why should some of us prosper and some of us not? In New Zealand, we have a Maori word, and that word is mana, M-A-N-A. And mana is a human being's basic dignity. And in Maori thinking, everything you do should be to respect. Every interaction you have with a person should respect their mana, and should not diminish their mana. And that is that's a guiding principle there that we sort of have.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. The fact that we live in a prosperous country or are in a prosperous situation is simply an accident of birth. Sometimes I think to myself, what if I had actually been born into a slum somewhere? We have no absolute right to our prosperity. And I just see it as a justice issue. I really, really do. That actually everybody on this planet has mana or dignity. We should respect that. We should work to enhance that. And so I see poverty and exploitation and oppression basically as an insult to God. I do actually. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Maiava, for joining us today and for teaching us more about ethical trade and the role that we consumers play in creating a more fair and just world. To read the entire interview with Dr. Susan Maiava, visit www.peopleheartplanet.com/blog, where you can also discover and shop fair trade and sustainable brands. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook, where you can find us at our handle, People Heart Planet.